Good afternoon. House Democrats are outraged by the amount of fraud that has been discovered in state programs and are committed to taking strong action to address it. Every single dollar of fraud is unacceptable. And that's because every single dollar of fraud is, number one, taxpayer money, but number two, it's dollars that are intended to go to among the most vulnerable people in Minnesota. Kids with autism, homeless people, people with significant disabilities. Who steals from kids with autism? House Democrats are absolutely committed to strengthening our laws to ensure that there is accountability for the people who are committing these crimes. These scammy businesses that are billing the state for services they are not providing need to be shut down, and the people responsible need to go to prison. And then we need to strengthen program integrity measures to ensure that this never happens again. The package that we are putting before you today is comprehensive in that respect. It includes strong measures on accountability to ensure that we catch fraudsters, and ideally catch them before the fraud occurs. Fraud prevention is a major priority of our caucus. But in addition to accountability, it includes comprehensive reforms to our Medicaid service programs in order to ensure that these programs are not targeted in the future, including getting at the root of the cause here, which is the drift towards privatization that's been happening over many years that has created space for this kind of scammy, fraudulent activity. We also want to focus on areas of fraud that are occurring that aren't Medicaid related. So when we see businesses defrauding our state's unemployment system, for example, by misclassifying workers, or when we see businesses or individuals defrauding our state's tax system by filing fraudulent tax returns, that is equally outrageous to us. That also compromises public trust in government. It also wastes taxpayer dollars, and it also infects the most vulnerable people in Minnesota. So we will take a really comprehensive approach to fraud this year and every year until we put the issue to bed. Now I'm going to turn it over to some members to describe some of the provisions in the proposal.
Good afternoon. Let me be clear. Every dollar stolen from state programs or services by bad actors is a dollar taken away from a senior, a child, or a person with disabilities who depend on that support. These programs are not just line items on a spreadsheet. They serve real people. When fraud drains resources, the harm doesn't fall on those committing it. It falls on Minnesotans who rely on care to live with dignity and stability. That's why we are holding a hearing this Thursday, that's tomorrow, on proposals to protect participants and taxpayer funds by strengthening oversight of healthcare programs and safeguarding services for those who truly need them. We are also advancing a proposal to strengthen the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, MFUCU. This will expand investigative capacity, improve coordination with state agencies and law enforcement, and ensure prosecutors have the tools to pursue complex, large-scale fraud schemes. It will help recover stolen funds, hold perpetrators accountable to deter future abuse. Strong oversight on the front end and meaningful accountability on the back end is how we protect both taxpayers and people who rely on these services. Minnesotans deserve a system they can trust, one that delivers care with integrity, transparency, accountability, and results. With that, I'll turn over to my colleague, Matt Norris.
As Leader Stevenson said, all of us in the House DFL caucus are furious about what's been happening with the fraud, and it's why I've been working on legislation like the Office of the Inspector General bill, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit bill, since as early as last year. But there's more that we can do and should be doing as we gain a better understanding of the types of fraud that are occurring and the types of schemes that are being used against our public programs. And that's part of what you see reflected in our agenda here. It's not just about holding fraudsters accountable, but that's a critical part obviously. It's also about making sure that there's excellence in governance and oversight. That's a lot of what I've been talking about with the conversation around the Office of the Inspector General bill, but it's also adding things like strengthening requirements for in-person site visits and using electronic visit verification so we know that someone who is supposed to be at a particular site is actually at that site. Strengthening the systems that we rely on, strengthening our IT systems and things like background checks, fingerprinting. Leader Stevenson mentioned too, not just in the Medicaid space, but cracking down on misclassification fraud, tax fraud that is occurring against our state. We also have to look at how do we legislate differently. There is a business model of fraud, and they have made our public programs their mark. What we have seen is a trend over many decades toward privatizing government services. And when we privatize these services, whether they're to for-profit businesses, whether they are to nonprofits, even when counties outsource things like case management, it adds extra layers. It adds in people who are not subject to public audits, and it makes it easier for these fraudsters to use these schemes against our public programs. And so we want to make sure that we reverse that trend toward privatization because, as Leader Stevenson likes to say, lunch ladies don't commit fraud. And with that, we'll stand for questions.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say the lunch ladies, so that's the, compare feeding our future, right, which is the privatization model that Representative Norris is talking about, where the federal government hired for-profit, not-for-profit businesses to distribute meals to kids, right, and that was rife with fraud. Compare that to the free lunches and breakfast program that the DFL passed without a single Republican vote in 2023, which relies on our public schools. That program does not have fraud because lunch ladies don't commit fraud, right? When you have that public program with direct accountability, you close the opportunity for fraud that exists, as we are finding, when you have a privatization model that allows for other layers to be in there. So sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry about that. I kind of was excited there, I guess. Why not just strengthen the ability to audit and have oversight with the existing system that's there? Right now, we've had this multi-decades drift towards privatization of all these services, and it's pretty entrenched. So why not take action today or this session to, do more to boost oversight there rather than drag things back? And maybe I'm assuming that that's the overall goal, but.
We want an all-of-the-above approach. So we want to take actions today that ensure additional accountability, that do strengthen existing systems, whether they're at the BCA, at the Attorney General's office, in the Office of Inspector General that exists in the Human Services Department, at the Legislative Auditor, and you'll see proposals on this list that address a lot of those issues. We also want to have a focus on making sure this never happens again. And that's where the privatization piece comes into play as the ultimate solution, is to get rid of the opportunities that these scammy businesses are using to defraud the government. But we can do other things this year that are about fraud prevention. We've been having this discussion on the floor about the Office of Inspector General. And the hang-up right now is that we want to put provisions in that bill that would empower the Inspector General to do fraud prevention work. And Republicans will not allow that amendment on the bill. We don't think it's enough to just hold accountable people who have committed fraud. We want to make sure this never happens again in the future. And we're not going to let that bill move forward until we have a permanent solution to fraud. And we think that that should be the goal, is preventing fraud so it doesn't happen in the first place. It isn't good enough just to lock up the people after the fact.
Can you speak more to that issue? Obviously, there was the whole song and dance on the floor of trying to bring that bill up today, and I'm wondering if you can talk about why not keep law enforcement within the agency. That's a big criticism of the Norris bill, is that the law enforcement agents are no longer within the Office of Inspector General.
Well, I can speak to that, but I want to return to what I was just saying first, which is that our focus is on prevention. And if you watched the hearing yesterday, Representative Norris offered several amendments to put fraud prevention into that OIG bill, and they were all voted down by the Republicans on the committee. That is our priority. In terms of law enforcement, we have tried over recent years to have a clear focus of where the law enforcement authority rests on fraud at the BCA. Just last session, we created a fraud unit at the BCA, taking the Commerce Fraud Bureau away from the Department of Commerce, putting it at the BCA, and there's a concern that when you have redundancies, when you have multiple layers of law enforcement, you make it harder for the left hand to talk to the right hand, and having it really in one spot adds clarity. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Actually, if I can say one last thing about that, the superintendent of the BCA, Drew Evans, not a partisan figure, I think makes a really compelling case as to why this is an important way to fight fraud, to have the law enforcement piece centralized at the BCA. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, totally fine. My apologies. You've got about a dozen bills that you're putting forward in this passage. Is there one of those bills you feel as though you could fast track to get passed on the floor, that you would see the buy-in from the other side?
Boy, I would like to think that most of these are things that we could work together and do quickly. When we talk about implementing electronic visit verification or beefing up the Medicaid fraud control unit, I would love to think that we could move quickly. I think that one of the problems about this debate, particularly this year, though, to be honest with you, has been that it's too focused on the idea that there's one bill that's going to solve this problem, or one bill that should be the focus, when really this problem requires a lot of bills to solve. And it's a problem that we actually have been working on for years, and we've passed a lot of bills, including bills that address some of the topics we're talking about today. I mentioned just last year we created this unit at the BCA, the fraud unit at the BCA, to tackle this issue. Last year, Chair Norris Committee added staff at DHS to do site visits. You'll see that site visits are a big aspect of our belief of what's necessary to combat fraud. There's no substitute to having people on the ground, having someone come up to you, to the business, and say, okay, surprise, I'm here, show me your books, show me what you're billing us for, and show me the people you're actually serving. Let me actually see that you're doing the work. That's really important. That's work that has been ongoing for years now, right? So we've got to stop thinking that there's one bill, because we support the OIG bill. It's in our package. Representative Norris is the chief author, and he's been working really hard on it. But that bill alone isn't enough to stop fraud, particularly in its current form, because in its current form, it's an entirely accountability-driven measure. It's entirely about catching fraud after it occurred. Representative Norris is trying to put prevention into the bill to stop fraud before it happens, but Republicans haven't allowed that in yet. So we've got to get away from thinking that there's just one bill on this, which has been the Republican approach of OIG is the end-all be-all. It's not. There's way more that needs to be done on fraud.
The managed care, or getting the scammy businesses, I know you've talked about this, trying to have the state maybe take over some of that, and it won't be one bill that probably changes that, but I'm wondering, of these ones, which is the one that you think starts getting at that problem of, not outsourcing it to these private businesses, these programs?
Yeah, I'll tell you what I think, and then I'm curious if Chair Nora has another idea. But the one that always has struck me as the most hard to swallow is that we are seeing counties increasingly outsource case management. So they're hiring third-party contractors to oversee individuals' care. So now you have a situation where you have the states paying the bill, some business is providing the service, and some other business is managing that. And we wonder why there's fraud occurring. There's not a direct line from the payor to the entity that's providing the service. That's a big problem. So we want to force counties to bring those third-party contractors back in-house and actually do the management. And by the way, I think it's time to have a serious conversation about the role that the counties have in Medicaid services. How many states do this? A dozen, I think?
It's about 10 states.
10 states. Only 10 states rely on their counties to administer these types of programs. Most of the other states all do it at the state level. And it's inefficient to have 87 different delivery mechanisms. And I think particularly at a time when we're facing financial challenges, we should really look towards using this as an opportunity to restructure the way we deliver those programs. But county case management would be mine. Do you have another one on privatization?
Leader Stevenson said it well. So we are one of 10 states whereby it's a state supervised, county delivered, and tribal government. So that conflicts with the work that we're doing here to make sure that the counties are partners in solving some of these problems.
Do you know how many counties are using these third party? And then if they are using them, is forbidding them from using in the future, would that be an added cost to the counties that they might have to go to their property taxpayers to, if they were bringing it in-house? I'm wondering if they're doing it as a cost-effective measure.
So the funding that goes to the case management comes from the state directly to the county. So whenever they outsource, they're also sending the resources to the outsource entities. So yes, there'll be some cost to the counties as they do their regular business, but it's really important for us to look through the system and say, where are we failing to deliver a good program?
When the Republicans had their anti-fraud press conference last week, a couple of them did mention updating our systems in terms of IT systems with Department of Human Services and also the counties. But they said that would probably cost hundreds of millions of dollars. I know Steve Elkins on this side is giving similar estimates. Do you have any specific legislation where you would propose appropriating money to update these systems?
I think that there are several bills that get at that because there's several systems. We did just last year, for example, allocate money to update the system for child protection, which is obviously not a Medicaid delivered service, SSIS. But it's a great example because it's the same problem. That computer program was so old it didn't have a copy-paste feature. Many of the programs that are involved in the Medicaid space are, Oregon Trail vintage programming. You got to remember what DOS is in order to be able to run them. But there is a significant price tag. In some of these cases, there's also a federal match, and so you can leverage federal dollars. SSIS, for example, I think we put in, I can't remember.
Maybe 15 million?
50, yeah, but it was like almost, I think it was a double, or was it? Yeah, it was a match.
So it would be more trying to get like a Medicaid waiver from the federal government instead of state legislation to do that?
No, it's not a waiver. It's there are federal programs that provide matching dollars when we upgrade technology. So if we appropriate money to upgrade the technology, there'll be federal matching dollars in some cases.
Do you think the money is there to do that if it does cost hundreds of millions given the financial outlook of the state?
When you look at the problems we are having with fraud, the ability to save money in the long term by investing some money up front and curing the technology, it's a no-brainer. Again, our focus is on making sure this never happens again. In order to do that, we need to close the vulnerabilities in the system. One of the vulnerabilities is that we have ancient technology.
What's the engagement that you guys have been having with the other side of the aisle here? You obviously need, at least one of them to vote with you on all these things. I've looked through most of these bills, and I don't see a single Republican author on it. And I'm just wondering if there is engagement at all.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Representative Norris is talking to folks about his bill. Our chairs are talking to their counterparts. And I would just note it's early in session, right? I mean, nobody should get too worked up by, a gimmicky floor vote on, week 2 of session. We know how this works, right? I mean, it's a long way from here to May 18th. And there's a lot of conversations that need to happen and probably need to not happen on the House floor, but need to happen in more constructive settings.
Do you envision that this will all come together as a big fraud prevention bill, or will these run individually?
I mean, let the chairs speak to that, but I see them running more individually, I think, in this policy year. But go ahead.
It's a great question. If there are bills that do not have any financial, if there's no fiscal note attached to it, we're working to get a mini omnibus from the Human Services in collaboration with my co-chair so that we can get things done quickly.
Are any of these ones that you have on this list stick out as ones that wouldn't require any money? I mean, I know Medicaid Fraud Control Unit that Representative Norris talked about this morning does allocate more money for FTEs in addition to some policy things in there too.
It does require money. Yeah, I think that most of these would require some even modest money in some cases. But again, there's not one bill here on fraud. There's going to be a lot of bills, and not more bills than even the ones that are on this list. This is a problem that requires a lot of solutions. And so I think the chair's point is if we have bills that improve the situation that don't have money, they can travel on their own. Otherwise, they'll have to be part of the budget conversation.
Leader Stevenson, this week, Tim O'Malley released his roadmap here to
Yeah.
getting at some of the problems. One of the things that he blamed us on was a culture of compassion over actually following through, making sure people were compliant. How do you address some of that with some of this legislation?
I think that the reason why, one of the reasons why this fraud is so outrageous is because the money is being taken away from the most vulnerable people in our society. And caring about fraud and trying to stamp out fraud is a compassionate act because it allows those resources to go to their intended purpose, which is the most vulnerable people in our society. We have to take this really seriously because it threatens the trust that folks have in government, but also because it puts these programs at risk. I really believe that there are folks on the other side of the aisle that believe that this is their opportunity, use fraud as a reason to get rid of these programs, to use it as a pretext to get rid of the programs, which would be disastrous for some of the most vulnerable people in our society. It would be disastrous for people with disabilities, for seniors, for homeless people, for kids with autism. So I don't know that you should set them against each other because the most compassionate thing we can do is make sure these programs work the way they're intended and not for scammy businesses.
In what you've experienced the first 2 weeks of session so far, do you feel like Republicans are working in good faith with you on anti-fraud issues, or do you think they're just using it as either an election issue or, as you just said, to get rid of these programs?
Boy, you can really feel that election coming, right? I mean, I think that when we see these manufactured votes on the same bill over and over again, they're really trying to drive a message, and I think they're trying to change the subject a bit from what's been in the paper lately. I'm hopeful that as the session goes along that we can have more constructive conversations, again, that aren't really going to occur on the House floor and in the form of gotcha votes. I'm hopeful that those conversations can happen.
Republicans last week also mentioned that they wanted to pass some measures that would maybe hold people accountable within agencies for letting fraud go unchecked. One of the examples given was what Judy Randall found in LLA report about retroactively dating some documents to show that they did something when they didn't, they being, I guess, people within DHS. Is there any room for DFL support on those? And I guess, what do you make of maybe that premise that there is some things that maybe the officials in the agency aren't doing and they should be doing?
Anyone who, first of all, no one is above the law, and there needs to be accountability for anyone who violates the law. And backdating forms is in violation of the law. It is outrageous that would happen, and there should be accountability for that. And our caucus supports accountability for anyone who's engaged in fraud enterprise, whether they're scammy businesses or people who have enabled that happening. So we believe in accountability. We believe no one's above the law. And that's why, for example, last week we tried to bring a bill to the floor to have the BCA investigate the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Good, because we thought that there should be accountability for law breaking. We think it here too. We're not selective in who we think should be held accountable for breaking the law.
Representative Norris, yesterday in committee, you said that you were proposing changes to the OIG bill in part because some of the provisions were too expensive and some were unconstitutional. And particularly you referenced the governor being able to appoint the OIG as a method to make it constitutional. How is the governor appointing the OIG? How is that? What is the constitutionality there?
Yeah. So the bill in its current form places the Office of the Inspector General within the executive branch. And I think there's a lot of really good reasons for that, and that's why through those 4 caucus talks last year, we ended up in a place where there was consensus among all 4 caucuses that it made sense to place the OIG within the executive branch. If we place the OIG in the executive branch, under the Constitution, separation of powers principles, the governor has to ultimately be the one to determine who gets appointed to that office. Now, we put in place a process where a bipartisan group of legislators will vet candidates and make recommendations to the governor, and then that candidate has to go be confirmed by the Senate. But there's clear consensus from both the legislators involved in the negotiations around the OIG bill. I've had conversations with the 3 main other ones. Consensus from nonpartisan staff as they're advising us. Consensus from the Office of the Legislative Auditor when I've consulted them on this bill, that in order for it to be constitutional and ready to get down to business on day one and not be held up in endless court challenges, we ultimately have to let the governor be the one to make that final selection.
And House Republicans say that the governor is railroading the OIG bill by getting involved. Is that true? Has the governor's staff been involved in these working group things just to work on provisions?
The governor's staff has not been involved in any working group. I don't see any way that the governor has been blocking progress on this.
To the 2 members who were on the fraud prevention committee, there was a bill that came out of committee earlier this week. I wonder if you can talk about, has there been any additional conversation behind the scenes since that's moved forward?
Yeah, so Representative Dave Pinto, the lead on the Fraud Prevention State Agency Oversight Committee representing the southwest part of St. Paul. The bill that you're referencing, as I recall, was one, Chris, now I'm blank, remind me again, it was the...
30 days notice.
Oh, right, the notice for disclosure, right, yeah. So you'll recall that we tried to amend the bill, and the version that came out of committee does have some flaws. It was better than the version that was introduced, which would have mandated disclosure even if it would have impaired an investigation, which seemed like a really obvious problem. The language in the bill as introduced by Representative Hudson would have just taken out any provision for possibly interfering with an investigation, which is a very important point. I've had some further conversations with both Representative Hudson and a few other folks. I don't know what the status of that is. It will next be going to a committee, Children and Families, where I know it'll get a significant review. I would hope that the concerns that our DFL members identified would be addressed when it's before that committee, and if not, I don't think it'll move forward, because the first thing we want is to make sure that we are stopping payment and holding accountable any fraudsters, and that's a kind of a bedrock principle.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.